So this is the wisdom, the foundation of wisdom. It came from Kemet. They recognize that. So in fact, it was not stolen legacy. No. They stole, in antiquity, they recognized. But when we start slavery, colonization, for 13th century, 14th century, 15th century, they changed the historiography. The way of writing history changed completely. How you can say, I learn from you and make you slave? It makes no sense. You are my master and make you slave now. I don't recognize that. I must destroy your mind and destroy my own mind too. Both. Yes. This is one of them too. One of the spent five years in Kemet studying. They call the father of atomist theory. He spent five years in Kemet studying their physics and what they call nature. Next. All of them systematically. I give picture in the book with detail. All of them. This one is a Plato himself. Plato has maybe 24 dialogues. In 12 of them, he gives a lot of detail concerning Kemet, a lot. You read any kind of information you want on Kemet is a Plato.
Africa, where the land we call Egypt had the name of Kemet by the people who lived there first. Kemet meaning most likely black people of the black land. Africa, home of Mount Kilimanjaro and the sources of the Nile, which the Kemites revered as sacred. Africa, where the faces of the kings who ruled Kemet still survive in silent testimony to their racial heritage and advanced culture in spite of what the history books say.
You're looking at the carving of King Mena, founder of all Egyptian dynasties, but not necessarily the founder of all things Egyptian. Hello, I'm Marty Chitwood, welcoming you to part 2 of African American Culture, A Second Look. In the first part of this series, we discovered, through the advice of Dr. Asa Hilliard, that the Egyptians considered themselves black. We also found out that during the first kingdom of Old Egypt, there was a plethora of learning and something called the pyramid building age. Now we're going to look at what happened in the second and third dynasties of Old Egypt.
This second golden age here, which the Egyptologists normally call the Middle Kingdom, many things were going on, but this seemed to be the thing that characterized the age more than anything else. You had a virtual explosion of literature that occurs here. For example, by this time you have all different genres of literature, such as the epic story, short stories, poems, wisdom literature.
And hieroglyphics?
All written in hieroglyphics, or metaneture as we prefer to say, which was the African name for hieroglyphics. And we now have many of these texts that you can read now translated in English, and they are indeed very profound texts. You also had scientific texts, such as mathematical texts. In fact, at this very period here, 2000 BC, which is over 1,000 years before Homer, Africans in the Nile Valley were studying trigonometry. Not just geometry, but trigonometry. And we have their textbooks. We have samples of the textbooks that were used.
This is problem number 51, which gives you the formula for finding the area of a triangle, 1/2 base times height. So this is relatively basic geometry. Next slide, please. But problem number 56 is something else. Problem number 56, let me see if I can, actually, it might be better if I get my glasses on and actually read this a little bit. Yes. Problem number 56 in the Rin Mathematical Papyrus, that's the one you see up there, seeks to find the slope of a pyramid whose height is 250 cubits and whose base is 360 cubits. The answer is 5 1/25 palms for each cubit in height, representing the cotangent of the angle of the slope of the pyramid's face. Now, if you've got a cotangent, if you can find cotangents, you know the way you can find tangents is that you flip the cotangent over. It's the inverse of a tangent. The other thing, too, just look at that. Imagine that that pyramid is three-dimensional, because that's what it's supposed to be. Now, all you really have to do is inscribe a triangle inside that pyramid. A right triangle whose height is also the same as the height of the pyramid. Therefore, the face becomes the hypotenuse. And half of the pyramid's base becomes the base of that right triangle, and then the height of the pyramid becomes the height of the right triangle. When you have all that in place, and it's really just a matter of drawing it in, you then can find sine and cosine. So now, if they had the tangent and cotangent and the ability to find sine and cosine, by definition, they have trigonometry. Now, the reason why I make that point is because every historian of science tells you that trigonometry wasn't invented until Hipparchus did 1,500 years later. Now, you see, we're not just talking about rudimentary calculation. We are now moving into the realm of higher mathematics, the foundation of all mathematics. Next slide, please.
Planet. But clearly, when we show you pictures of who these people are, they're people that you would call black people today. The founder of this dynasty is probably one of the blackest people in the history of the pharaonic reign. His name Mentuhotep. Also, when you look at the 12th dynasty here, we have three very prominent pharaohs, and they're very clearly black. And we have their images. We have Senwosret I, we have Amenemhet III. When we look at these images of these pharaohs, clearly they could not be mistaken for anything other than black people.
The ancient Greeks also repeatedly described the civilizations of the Nile Valley as peopled with those of sunburned skin. These same Greeks sat at the feet of those African cultures to gain knowledge in science, art, religion, and architecture.
This is the greatest building of the ancient world. This is the Great Lodge of Waset, in a city now called Luxor. In ancient times, the Greeks called Thebes, but called Waset among the ancient Africans of the Nile. This was the building that the greatest Greeks, Socrates, all these Socrates tried to get to learn at the feet of the Africans. This is a pillar temple, a learning center. The first universities of the ancient world were among with the Africans. At Saqqara, the mysteries were taught at the learning center around the step pyramid, and later, further down the Nile, at the city called Waset or Wat, Luxor today.
What dynasties are we talking about?
Asa Hilliard, Dr. Hilliard, and others will talk about the tens of thousands that were taught here by degrees. This is the granddaddy of the Masonic order. This is the granddaddy of the Rosicrucians.
You always get the feeling that Egypt was perhaps one of the earliest civilizations, but somehow it came to a dead end. And then the Greeks sprang up and they did everything wonderful.
Do you believe that?
It's not true. And they wrote about it, they acknowledged their debt to Egypt, and I think there can be no doubt that there was some influence.
Pillar temples, wherever you go, are the center of learning in this Western society. The Greeks took this pillar temple, inspired by it, and built the Parthenon on top of the Acropolis in Greece. Later, Europeans were inspired to build a pillar temple at Columbia University. That's the Butler Library. And on top of it, each of these Greeks, Socrates, all of them on top of it. In Washington, D.C., the Lincoln Memorial is a pillar temple. That's why we have to strip down to the basics. These pillar temples are inspired by the most significant pillar temple in the world, the Great Lodge at Luxor.
Possible. Now, all that to say is that the proto-technology necessary for the eventual creation of high culture or civilization, again, we find it in sequence in Africa before we find it anywhere else. Now, it isn't just proto-technology we're talking about. We're even talking about intellectual culture. This is the Ashango bone, discovered in Zaire, it's about 10,000 years old. It demonstrates, for one thing, a counting and numerical system, a binary counting and numerical system, and it's also apparently a lunar calendar. So here we see, shall we say, the prototypes of science also making their appearance in Africa before they appear anywhere else in what is now Zaire. Oh, goodness, I'm afraid of this. This is the title page from the Rind mathematical papyrus. Unfortunately, it's on its side, so you almost have to turn over like that to see it. I apologize. Nonetheless, this early, shall we say, mathematical experiments or mathematical speculations give rise in the lower Nile Valley in what is now Egypt, or at that time ancient Egypt, 4,000 years ago, to mathematics as a coherent, cohesive discipline. Mathematics did not begin with the Greeks, even the Greeks say so. Geometry was an African invention. And Pythagoras admitted as much. And so did everybody who came after him. This is a written mathematical papyrus that is 4,000 years old. This is the title page. I'm just going to read you the translation of the title page. The entrance into the knowledge of all existing things and obscure secrets. Interesting title page for a mathematical treatise. We find in the Rind mathematical papyrus, we find formulas for the area of the rectangle, which is problem number 6. In the this is the Rind mathematical papyrus. There are, I think, 4 mathematical papyri that have been discovered. One is the Moscow mathematical papyrus, showing you the area of a rectangle, or the formula for obtaining the area of a rectangle. A equals L times B. This is problem number 14 of the Moscow papyrus. This is the formula for finding the volume of a truncated pyramid. Now, the volume for a truncated pyramid gives you volume equals height, 1/3 the height, times a squared, ab plus b squared. This is actually more difficult than finding the volume of the total pyramid. So if they could, check on the job says, he who can do more can do less. So if they can find the volume of the truncated pyramid, they also knew the volume of the pyramid, how to find the volume of the pyramid. 1/3 of the height times area squared. This is problem number 56, also from the Rind mathematical papyrus. This is a problem that allows them to demonstrate how to find the slope of the pyramid. And in this problem, they actually deal with cotangents, showing that they had also not only begun their studies in geometry, but also in trigonometry as well. Among these ancient people of the Nile, these ancient black peoples of the Nile, we find the first evidence of algebra, because in the Rind mathematical papyruses, number 24 to 27, are algebraic equations of the first degree. They also handled algebraic equations of the second degree. Algebra is basically, if you have to strip it down to its essentials, its ability to solve problems when you have an unknown. Now, we call that unknown usually X or Y. The ancient Kamites used to call it a quantity. This is problem 51 of the Rind mathematical papyrus, showing finding the area of a triangle. Basically, area equals 1/2 the base times the height. Problem number 50, which we don't have up here, the ancient Kamites were also able to find the area of a hemisphere, which is, in modern notation, area equals 2 times pi times r squared, which means that they could also find the area of a sphere, which is 4 pi r squared. They also, therefore, if they knew that much, they knew the area of the circle. And the area of the circle, as we know, is pi r squared. The Rind mathematical, our modern value for pi is 3.14128. The ancient Kamite value for pi was 3.1605. People have tried to say that the Babylonians had a higher level of mathematics than the ancient Egyptians, and yet the best that the Babylonians could come up with for a value of pi was 3. Now, the ancient Egyptians actually had what we could only describe as understanding arithmetic and geometrical progressions, which is to say that they knew, in order to find an arithmetical progression, that S, which is the sum of n terms, equals n over 2 times 2a, where a is the first and lowest term, plus n minus 1, plus d, where d is the common difference. They also understood geometrical progressions. We know it in the problem of the Hekat, where a geometrical term is the following, or a geometrical progression is this. To find the sum of the geometrical progression whose first term is 7 and whose common ratio is 7. Now, those of you who read Mother Goose lately will remember the Mother Goose rhyme, as I was going to St. Ives. As I was going to St. Ives, I met a man with 7 wives. Each wife had 7 sacks. Each sack had 7 cats. Each cat had 7 kids. Kids, cats, sacks, wives. How many were going to St. Ives? This is a geometrical progression that you find in the Rin mathematical papyrus 4,000 years earlier. In the problem of the Heka, instead of using wives, they said 7 houses. Each house had 7 cats. Each cat had 7 mice. And each mice had 7 spelt. And they went one further. They went to a 5th progression. Each spelt had 7 hekats. So they went to progression out to 16,807. So the idea, as Gilling says, that the ancient Kamites did not understand the theoretical applications of the mathematics that they invented is merely a conceit. It has nothing to do with the reality. So, the Great Pyramid. We're only going to say a little bit about the Great Pyramid. Certainly the grandest edifice of its kind ever created by the hand of man. Just want to say I just want to point out 2 things about the Great Pyramid. 483 feet in height. The base of the pyramid is 13 acres in area. It was built out of 2.8 million, 2.7 million blocks of stone. The lightest stone was 1 ton. The heaviest was 7 tons. Planed to such a smoothness that when they were fitted together, if you plucked the hair out of your head, you could not fit it between the joints. Oriented precisely to the 4 cardinal points. The descending passage was built at 3 degrees 43 minutes in slope. Oriented exactly to Alpha Draconis, which shone down at 3340 BC, 3340 BC, and it won't shine it down it again until 26,000 years later. The height of the pyramid, if you multiply it by 1 billion, gives you the mean distance between Earth and Sun. People say that's a coincidence. Well, as has been said, a coincidence is merely something that happens that you can't explain, that you haven't determined what the cause and effect is. Very strange coincidence. The Kamites did not understand the theoretical applications of the mathematics that they invented is merely a conceit. It has nothing to do with the reality. So, I'm fond of asking young black students is, why are you afraid of mathematics? Why do you run away from mathematics and physics? Africa invented mathematics and physics. That isn't my opinion, that just happens to be the reality. I didn't make it happen. That just happens to be the way it is. And the Greeks themselves say so, not once, not twice, but at least 12 times. All the Greek mathematicians studied in Egypt. Eudoxus, Archimedes, Hipparchus, Pythagoras, Thales, Plato. In fact, the Greeks were in a habit, if they didn't study in Egypt, they would say they would in order to give themselves credibility.
Of that civilization. But what's important is that when Kemet appears in the human record, it appears in 3100 BC with a fully developed civilization. Writing was already in place. Astronomy was already in place. They already had the 365-day-year calendar and 1 quarter for the leap year and all of that. That calendar had actually been put in place around 4236 BC. So we're talking about a fully developed, high-technical civilization.
History relevant. Problem 24 in the Rhine Papyrus, by which the problem is solved by means of an unknown quantity, aha. This is the earliest example of algebraic procedure. Right, did we know then that black people invented algebra? There's the proof. And therefore, if people knew their history, if people knew that their history was relevant, then they wouldn't want to be trying to aspire to be somebody else.
That's right, that's right.
Right, the calibration of the Karnak water clock. Right, let me explain this. Right, what's going on here, there's a water clock where if you look at the inside of it, we've got it divided up into 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 months, right? And then at certain points of the month, the days get longer and shorter. Does that make sense? And therefore, the calibration of the holes is different. So each hole is 1 hour. So you get it? So when you fill it, there's your first hour, second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh, eighth, ninth, 10th, 11th. You follow me? And then by the time it runs out, 12 hours. So we've got 12 hours of the night is what this actually represents. Now, the idea of the hour, that's an African concept. We invented that. The concept of time is an African concept. We invented that. So we've got the concept of numbers and algebra. We've now got the concept of time. And there's a scholar called Naim Akbar, and he's one of our best psychologists. And he studied ancient Egyptian concepts and realized that the Egyptians had not just worked out advanced ideas in psychology. Their ideas were so advanced that modern psychology is not caught up with where they were at. That makes sense? Yeah. Right, let me explain it. Here we've got some Egyptian concepts of the soul. Now, let me introduce the discussion. If I was to deal with what makes a human being, most of us would say, well, if you cut your arm off, you're still you. If you cut your second arm off, you're still you. Cut your legs off, you're still you. So there comes a point where it's not you. And where it's not you is when you lose your personality. That's what most people would think. Meaning that a human being is part physical, part personality. Or to use the Descartesian sense, part mind, part body. Now when Descartes said that, everyone said, yeah, wicked idea. Not realizing that this was about to be dug up. And when this was dug up, they found out that the Egyptians divided people into Ka, Ba, Kaibit, Ab, Kat, Sahu, Ku. That makes sense? Yeah. So what? Once you know that the Ka is the person's spirit, that's one aspect of a person. Ba, that's the person's personality, that's the second aspect of a person. Kaibit, this is the person's shadow, that's the third aspect of a person. Ab, that's the person's heart, that's the seat of consciousness. I mean, from a point, conscience, because that's what gets heavy when you do something wrong. Then you've got the Kat, that's your physical body, that's what stays right here and is recycled with all the elements like everything else. Then you've got the Sahu, which is in the heavens, your double. And then you've got your Ku, which is the heart of the double. Does that make sense? Now, can you see that's blowing mind and body out of the water? Now, this is the point. Once we accept that a human being is all of these elements, yeah, therefore spirituality has a scientific purpose. And that scientific purpose is to unify these different selves into a coherent one. Now we have a working definition of mental illness. Mental illness is where these are not coordinated. Does that make sense? Now who came up with this idea? Us, thousands of years ago. And we can...
That's your illness. I mean, it's about time that we talk about it. We can't just come and gloat in what some one of our ancestors did in building a pyramid. We can't gloat in the fact that our ancestors gave the word writing, the Medu-Neter, which the Europeans call hieroglyphs. We can't gloat in the fact that medical science started with us and the hundreds of papyri that were written by African doctors, both male and female. We can't gloat in the fact that the 10 Commandments came from the negative confession. It has nothing to do with any Moses on Mount Sinai. Long. Moses himself was charged with committing murder, according to the Torah, against the Pharaoh soldier and was running from punishment. And he didn't reach to Mount Sinai until 40 years later. Somebody had a law against murder before he ran to Mount Sinai.
The weight of a single teaspoon of a white dwarf like Sirius B is about 100 tons because it's so small, dense, and heavy. The Dogon describe all of this. They describe Sirius B as being a white seed, is what they call it. It's very small, very dense, and very heavy. The Dogons say that it is composed of a metal not found on Earth they call Sagala, and it has been determined through spectrographic analysis That is exactly what it is composed of, a degenerate metal. They even describe, you see, when a red giant explodes to contract down a white dwarf, that is a nova explosion. It lights up the sky. The Dogon described that. The connections between white dwarfs and supernovas weren't even known until 1914. The Dogon even described matter being made up of incredibly small spinning particles, i.e. atoms. They describe all of the constellations of being composed of countless of stars spinning in space as galaxies. They describe the 4 moons of Jupiter, and these people, to all intents and purposes, don't have even a system of writing that we know about. At least not one that anyone has ever discovered. If there is such thing as a father of medicine, it is this man or it is no one, Imhotep. Even though he lived 3,000 years before Hippocrates, we actually know more about him than we know about Hippocrates. We knew who his parents were, we knew where he was born, where he was raised, what he did. He was, as Sir William Osler, and this was Osler's institution right here. Osler practically founded this institution, did he not? Osler said of Imhotep, and by the way, Osler himself was, I've read some books by Osler. Osler was no joke. He was real. He was a real Renaissance physician, one of the last in this country anyway. And what does he say about Imhotep? The first figure of a physician to stand out clearly from the mists of antiquity. Or as I like to call him, the first universal genius of whom we have any knowledge. He was prime minister under Djoser, so therefore a statesman. He was renowned as a philosopher and a purveyor of oral wisdom. He was an architect of genius, having designed and built the step pyramid of Saqqara, but above all, he was a divinely gifted physician. So great was his renown as a physician that by the 6th century BC, he became deified as a physician and worshipped by the Greeks, including Hippocrates, because Asclepios was identified with Imhotep. So when you worship Asclepios, you would worship Imhotep. So in the Hippocratic Oath, when the physician says, I swear by the god Apollo and I swear by the god Imhotep, I swear by Asclepios, he is in fact swearing by Imhotep. This is the interior portion of the cranium, which was described by the ancient Kamites. I might just mention that they described the results of what happens to injuries to the temporal portion of the brain. The physicians in the room know that in the front part of the temporal portion of the brain is Broca's area, controlling articulate speech. Behind Broca is Wernicke's area, controlling processing and understanding of sounds and language. You get a lesion or an injury to the Broca's area, you get expressive aphasia. To Wernicke's area is receptive aphasia. Expressive aphasia means you slur your words. Receptive aphasia means that you can't understand what's being said to you, so you speak in meaningless babble. With the ancient Egyptian, and by the way, an injury to both, you can get injury to both, which is total or mixed aphasia. The ancient Egyptians describing this in the Edmund Smith Papyrus. So they have not only described the sort of macro surface of the brain, they had described the cortical functions of certain areas of the brain nearly 4,000 years before Broca's experiments 120 years ago, 130 years ago. Next slide. Imhotep, if he had done nothing else in the world but designed and built this temple complex, his fame would be indelible and assured. But beyond that, he was even more renowned as a physician. I'm sorry Dr. Watkins had to leave, because if he didn't already know it, and he already might, it is in ancient Cam, 6,000 years ago, that the first systematic studies of cardiovascular circulation and cardiovascular physiology began. There is something called the Edmund Smith Surgical Papyrus, about 6,000 years old, which I call the founding document of scientific medicine, in which are described the heart, as the center of the circulatory system, the major vessels going out of the heart and into the periphery and into the vital organs, the movement of blood out of the heart, the phenomenon of pulsation that occurs as a result of the movement of blood outside the heart, the measuring of the pulse itself, which Hippocrates, by the way, did not do, the understanding a relationship between the heart and the lung, heart and the kidneys, and even the heart and the liver. The physicians in the room know what I mean when I talk about passive congestion of the liver as a result of congestive heart failure. Ancient Egyptians described that. They described angina pectoris. They even described Stokes-Adams attacks. What is a Stokes-Adams attack? Some people can get heart dysrhythmias. Those dysrhythmias cause a slowing down of blood to the brain, and the person can pass out. Simply put, the ancient Egyptians describe that not only in the not in the Edmund Smith papyrus, but in the Ebers papyrus. So that cardiovascular physiology and cardiovascular pathology and cardiovascular medicine begins in Africa 6,000 years ago. And I think Johns Hopkins is one of the world's centers of cardiovascular medicine, if I'm not mistaken. Don't even know it. They owe a debt to ancient black people living on the Nile 6,000 years ago.